igama lami Vusi welcome Mdoyi. I was born in a train, traveling from a Transkei, going back to Joburg in the East End, a Katlehong in Hlongwane section. I can say it's one of the smallest sections in the township. It has got 303 houses, living within 400 square meters yard, with about 7-8 families at my grandmother's place, sharing one toilet. However, so Mami met my dad in that very same section. The situation in that very same environment is that we are cousins to each other. Almost everyone were cousins to each other. During my dad's and my mom's times, way back then, the guys wouldn't allow the girls to fall in love with the guys from the other places or other sections. So when my dad and my mom, they met, my mom went back to Transkei because her parents, they always believed that in the villages you'll always get good education and you'll get to be taught good manners and still reconnect with your family values. So she was sent back in the villages, but at the boarding school, only to find out that she's pregnant, but she could not go back. And then, but because of the time it was growing, she had to go back. That's when she gave birth to me. The name Vusi Mdoyi, I was given by my grandmother from my father's side, which they were front opposite to each other. Because in my township, we find that our fathers would fall in love with somebody back opposite, front opposite, and then your aunt is the same, and then that's when, I can say that I believe, which is this thing of having to be cousins to each other. Because when we met with Amachita playing, and even other sisters, Klalopati, Amatina, and would always know that this one is my aunt's daughter, or it's my uncle's distance son. But when we reconnect to each other, then we'll always find this network of having to be one family because of that era. I make a living through Mapantsula. I'm a Pantsula creative. I grew up in a Pantsula environment, like I believe most of us in the townships. We've experienced that kind of an environment where we've seen Mapantsula, whether by clothes, fashion, whether by approach, how they live, how they make a living, or how do they survive, or through dance. I happen to get to connect with this Pantsula, firstly, through Pantsula dance. At my father's family, I used to see my uncles dancing, but it was called the calabat. Just people stepping, changing positions, whistling, stamping, and then making certain rhythms. So that was called the calabat. My aunts used to also sing in the community youth clubs, in the weddings, even in the funerals, formal parties and informal parties during that time, in that era. So I sort of fall in love with that, dance, and also the language as part of it, and the attitude as part of it, and having to find myself in order to survive, because we also had to survive that very same small community. Because if people, they will tell you, it was known as a dangerous place, because people who grew up in Shongwane, they would not go to other places. As much as I said that they would fall in love with each other and having babies around the very same community, but very talented community. We were very involved in extramural activities, karate, boxing, soccer, and all that. Yeah, so in short, that's my background. But with this Pantsula, later on, after having to dance in the streets, having to dance at school, being known as the Pantsula, dancing on top of the desks, having to have free access in community festivals and school festivals. And then I was famous by Pantsula, though I was a bit good, in soccer and also karate a bit, but this Pantsula gave that kind of an attention to me. And I would also follow who are the best Pantsula dancers around the township. And if I may have to travel, I would do that. If I have to go to the nightclubs, I would do that. If I have to dance, for peers and compete for peers. But for me, it was all about ukuthi ngiyotshontsha itayela or ngiyolanda itayela or ngiyothatha inspiration. Because I always wanted to be one of the best, Pantsula dancers way back then. Then, fast forward to the story, I happened to form a group, at the backyard of my grandmother's place, but at my mother's place. Because at my father's place, is not people who would encourage, us to really go to school and get good education. It was just talented people. And even if you leave school and then they would not really make any follow-ups. But at my mother's place, which is the front opposite of my father's place, and because my grandmother was a nurse and she used to be a teacher, so education, it was quite important, even though besifunde ekolweni zaselokishini, because besikhuliswa ngabogogo, we could not really go to special, schools where we can get maybe so-called better education, according to how the levels are, because there's, public education that we get, and then there's also private education and special education, But again, fast forward, having to be a leader, without knowing that I'm a leader, and having to always collect people around, young people, and then we started to dance in a 2x3 square meter floor, which is, we call it a stoop. And then the first fence way back then, it was our community when they were passing by, and then they would see what was happening. And, through survival, my grandmother for surviving, to raise the family, and she built shacks, for tenants, and then there was also a garage which there was a tenant who was operating a saloon, and even people when they come to the saloon, and they would always experience and embrace and say what we're doing is quite very good because of the challenges that we face in our community. Then later on, I graduated in, having to join via Katlehong way back then. In the 90s, it was a community youth club. When I saw these young people, they were trained by 5 community creatives, who were Pantsula dancers. But later on, they left us because of greener pastures, and they said, there's no life in Pantsula or in the dance, and they would rather, resort to other careers and all that. But I was left with that team. The reason why I joined that team after having to be all over the place, dancing in the streets, hanging around with the big boys and then dancing in the nightclubs and all that. When I saw those young people, they were wearing the same gear, same costume. And for me, I would relate so much with the discipline of soccer because I always wanted to maybe one day be a soccer player or maybe, be a karate champion. So a costume, it was a resemblance of a discipline for me and how, they conducted themselves, mixing up, my father's background and then my mother's background, and then there's a part of it discipline that goes along with it. And then I joined the crew, and then later when I became a leader, and then the crew dissolved because of elders left, but I had to regroup again the crew to recruit my other two colleagues, which is Stephen Piakefaleni and Michael Moloi, who is now in Las Vegas. And we continued with the Vaya Katlehong. We represented our township so much. Vaya Katlehong, Katlehong means a place of success. Vaya, it was encouraging people to via Katlehong because Katlehong, way back then, it was known as a place of violence. There were a lot of challenges because of right after the 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992 violence that took place in black townships, which we experienced a lot of that when we go into schools. We'll see somebody who's been thrown out of the train, or out of a moving train, and then all of a sudden you have to still go to school. And then in some other times you go to school and then you find somebody who's bent a gate in the school right at the gate. And we grew up in a place of having to experience gunshots, having to parents wethu afuna ukusigqokisa njengamantombazana sigqoka amarogo, dressing like girls, and go to churches if you are a bit taller, and then they say now you're a man, go and protect your community. So right after that, we know that there were a lot of guns. Nathi sikhule, being able to build a quash, a pilot gun. We knew how to build that type of a gun. It was an era where young people would not really dream, but they would have to only survive. So right after that, that gave birth to, community youth clubs like Vaya Katlehong, which, fast forward the story, we continued and we won competitions. We were very aggressive. And then until we got to be introduced in theater spaces, coincidentally so, and being on Stepping Stones, above Vita Dance Umbrella. And now you start to see the lights, there's technicians here, and you want to learn other things. Because you start to understand now, wow, they call this art, and what is art? Then later on, we would win those competitions as well, and then get into other levels. And then now you get to be commissioned, and you don't even know what do they mean by saying you are commissioned. And then until I remember they invited the late Jack Simela, who was a director of Soweto Dance Theatre. He was an elder who was very passionate about the arts and well exposed, a professional choreographer, leader, community builder. They said maybe, these young people could really understand and you could develop something, they've got something in them. And now they are commissioned, they don't even understand that. And I would even received awards and then as a choreographer, but then you start to want to understand what is a choreographer. Choreographer, and then they explain. And it's things that you've been doing. They call you a leader, it's things that you've been doing. They call you a conceptualizer because it's things that you've been doing. You didn't know this is how to conceptualize and all that. All these titles they've been, they always followed us. We collaborated with Prachiki, and then Prachiki, I remember after we won an award at Vita Dance Umbrella at the contemporary level. And I received a call from Vusi Mdoyi. his wife, and then called me, Cheki is in England, and he asked me if you've got a passport. I said, no, I don't have a passport. He said, no, you must go and apply for a passport as soon as tomorrow. I had mixed feelings, excitement a little bit, but I don't really understand what is happening. Passport, somebody speaks about a passport. You don't even think about a person has got to have a passport. Growing up eShlongwane and being a Bene Plus, and having to be exposed bit by bit to Amanya Makas because of his Pantsula, being known to other sections and other schools because of his Pantsula. And then now in other platforms because of his Pantsula, Seni Choose, Seni Pramfontein, Senahamba near Durban because of his Pantsula. Now you're receiving a call, which now you must apply for a passport. And then now, fast forward the story, I was booked a flight and then to go to England, at Queen Elizabeth Hall in UK, to facilitate being a teacher, to teach Pantsula. I remember asking Ubrachiki, manje in England, do we have people abakhuluma isiZulu uyabona abakhuluma isuthu abacamthayo abantu abamnyama because mina English baba it's a problem English. And he said to me, no, you won't find black people. There's very few black people, maybe 2% or 3% of black people there. But you'll have to do what you normally do to your community or with your colleagues. Because I've experienced how I worked with you. I said, but Bracheki, teachers are people who've got diplomas and degrees and masters. I mean, I don't have any of those things. I said, no, you're going to do the very same thing. I was like, what is it that I was actually doing? I said, no, you would always, I will always explore ideas with you, and then you'll always be in front of people and then always demonstrating. And you've always, been demonstrating movement and teaching people, and then the members of your crew would adapt to those movements. This is what I'm talking about. This is the thing that you'll be doing. You'll be workshopping. Hey, it's big weights now, workshopping. So I was a bit excited, but at the same time, a bit frustrated until I landed, and then there were 3,000 people. Fast forward on the day, watching, the setup was like a Carlton Center, when you see Carlton Center, and then there's a floor, right on the floor, and then there was 270 people, and then there was a stage, and I was given a lapel so that I can be an instructor to those 270 people while there's 3,000 people watching. And I remember very well, since from the day that I was told that it's confirmed that I'm leaving and I'm going to teach, I could not really figure out what to do when I went there. Maybe now it makes sense, now I see myself as I've been doing things without like having to really have proper preparations. So I remember giving a DJ, handing over a CD, which I played track number 11. Oskido, Church Groove, played track number 11. The track number 11 started. And then when I was like jumping and people were starting to follow me to jump as well, I was like, oh, okay. So if I'm jumping, everyone is already ready to jump. I said, Waza, Cho, down. I went down, everyone went down. Up, everyone went up. And then I started to kick. I said, kick, kick. Everyone was kicking. I said, okay, now you must kick like a wild animal. And then I started to kick aggressively, and then people were following. And then I said, no, kick as if like you are riding a horse. Tagara, chat, tagara, chat, tagara, chat. Waza, chesa, ka. Fast forward, and then, the workshop was a success. However, after I got congratulations and all that, Brian Williams from America in United States, who was one of the co-directors of Step Africa, South Africa, UK, and America, came to me and said, hey, Vusi, you've done a great class, man. Can you explain to people, what is this thing that you are doing? And also maybe explain each and every movement? I said, yes, I can. And then after I said yes, and then I started to have a knock. In fact, I've never done something like that before. Now I have to start to research. And I used to hate history in school because of it used to speak about things that I could not relate with. I mean, I've always related with things through pictures. If people are talking to me, I see pictures. So if, the pictures are not something that I relate to, or I get to be excited, or I'm interested in connecting with, and then for me, it was, all these maps, I was Spider-Man, when you think of geography or about history and whatnot. Nama emperors, so it was boring, and also the numbers and remembering the numbers, and it was a serious challenge, But with this Pantsula, I would remember the numbers. Through what? Because as Pantsuleni, you can memorize, and it can get into you internally and memorize 1,000 movements within 1 minute. 1,000 movements within 1 minute. So for me, that was enough. But through this thing now, I have to understand the history. Hii ni Mapantsula, hii na Mapantsula. Hii vela Mapantsula vele. I have my own understandings, and then I started to also ask my elders, what is their understanding of his Pantsula. And I would relate with so much, of things, and then I started to, to not really make my own assumptions, but to connect, with Mapantsula and the stories of Mapantsula, because mainly it was how we lived. And now when movement-wise, when you do a movement and then, skomba phezulu, yeah, man, this thing is coming from mathematics, or ngizalwe ngiyi-1, ngize ngiyi-1 la emhlabeni, when, having to have this, ego and having to have a sense of protection and all that because of the environment that we grew up in. You had to have something. Lento lena isho kona logo. You understand that number 1, ngizalwe ngiyi-1, ngiyofa ngiyi-1. And then at the same time, there's something that is common about, having to point your finger. And then, each and every township, when you go to town, mistakes, 1. Local, esleker. I'm coming back, I'm still around. Or the taxi, So now you started to have all these, notations and dictionary on movements on your own. Okay, Lena, and then Komba Ganje, and then move Ganje, and then Mapantsula say Pituri, this is how they walk. They walk like a duck, and then and then they have a sense of pride. And also how we also, look at each other and also analyze each other. No, this one is a Pantsula, or this one is coming from Eswazini or Upuma Wazulu, because we are shy. The way he proposes girls and all that, Ubupantsula bukhona lapho. Uyangithola izifo. Uthi ubonisa lokho kube ukuthi kuhamba lokho strategy mos lento lena. And then in the costume, and then the cleanliness. These people are clean people. These people are people with a strategy. These people is people who are given wear clothes, for labor, working wear clothes, and then they transformed it, in a way that they feel comfortable in themselves. But overall, manje ayibi normal seikanje. Isigqoko ngisinikezwe sona emsebenzini, and then I feel okay. So they always found themselves in whatever environment they're in, so that they have their own way of living. And the qualities of Ubupantsula, Pantsula nomshoza, which is the female side of Mapantsula and the male side of Mapantsula, and these energies, how they connected to each other, and how these people used to take care of each other without having to compare each other to anyone, or maybe, fight for power issues. Abu Mama, which is Abu Mshoza, they came with Abu Mastokfel. And they came with Abu Mashipin, places where people would gather, people where would have meetings and all that. So the importance of Abu Mshoza in our community, the importance of Mapantsula in our community. And I started to relate to Manabu Mandela Mapantsula, nanoma bebanga babizi uthi Mapantsula, their mentality, how they fought the struggle, how they came with the amalontoza, with the strategies. You understand that? how they stamped ukuthi no, because way back then, when I look at their stories, these people, they were not fighting ukuthi bona themselves, they will have careers. They were fighting for the next generations to come. Hence why Mapantsula, we don't complain. Hence why you find the Pantsula roboting, dancing at the robots. We are street echoes. So it's an alternative office than complaining. And I find that within Mapantsula, I never went to school to dance, but of course, the dance gave an attention to the art itself, and then I started to research and being inspired by contemporary Afrofusion, where there's a ballet, where it's a tap in. I always wanted to see something that is beautiful that I connect with. But the approach Mapantsula, it's always unique. Epantsuleni, and then you get to be called a choreographer. Who goes to school and they want to learn how to choreograph. Later on, you're an administrator because you need to administer this thing. You need to understand the value chain of this thing. You don't have to always complain. Hey, these ones, they robbed me and I came with a concept and then all of a sudden now they are not giving me money, blah, 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 and whatnot. What did you learn? Come up with the next strategy. Graduate from there. Build your own platform. So Ubupantsula is that mixture, and no one really owns this Pantsula to say Ubupantsula where's Amazulu. Ebupantsuleni, so it's also Italian itself, it's Mutsohako. There's a mixture of Zulu, Xhosa, English, Afrikaans, Espantsuleni. And then we are born Amazulu, we are born Sintu, a sense of pride. We are born Utagazelela from the tracing of the history of where you're coming from. And now Mumavusana, Ngalshaileza, Mumavusana, Mfana Lebe Pansek was a fast 2.2. Isipamisnani. So, there's so much. Mapantsula is not a democracy, it's a real democracy. Mentally wise. Now we have to more than survive. Now we have to make a living with self-reliance. Hence, Tina, I always say, Tina, we are a product of rejection, and I'm happy. Not that I'm happy with all the outcomes because of obviously there's people who are still mentally arrested because of maybe apartheid and all that. We have to acknowledge that. For an example, I was never raised by my father, but even though my mom and my father, they were living, up front opposite, and then I'd always walk 8 meters, to my father's home, but my father would just leave Vienna, azela khona. Thank you, my father, for not being around because I missed to have a dad, and then that's why I'm a good dad to my daughter. I know there's broken families because of fathers or mothers or uncles and whatnot. And Ubupantsula, it's about promoting creativity. It's about being creative thinkers. We've got family structures that are broken because we don't have creative thinkers. Look at the leadership. They are not creative enough and being responsible and being transparent. Ubukosi, leadership is not all about power. It's how you use the power. It's about being humble. Amakosi, bekumele kuba abantu who are sympathizing with people more than ukuthi we are worshipping them. Same applies to our issues of land. No one really owns the land. Even the queen doesn't own the land. Even, a king doesn't own the land. Even when we dance, we embrace all these things. Masenza masekele. We symbolize no one is right at the center or maybe in the front, and then while you are at the center, you are allowed at that particular time to address, and then after that you move away and then you join the circle. And really deep thinkers. So mina ubupantsula, it's that kind of a mixture, how I explain it. And ipantsula for mina, it's a culture that was born. Abanye bathi subculture, not, but I don't want to suppress as if like it's something smaller than anything else or any other things. But for mina, it's pantsula, it's a culture that was born. It's a worm that was born under oppression. Then came Pantsula, because even before Pantsula, we know migration, our elders, great-grandparents, they were migrated to come Bumajobek and work underground. You are stripped, because normally, where they're coming from, you would not go underground. The only time when you go underground is when your body, when you are no more, then your body would go underground. So it means they were buried while they were still alive. But still, they would find themselves and they would share a culture, and then they would sing, and then they would push the work. For me, now, all these people, it's mix all the sacrifices that they did. And then later on, even after they've brought their families and then started to have townships and nan, Pantsula sibuya naso lapho. Yiko bathi dlala Mapantsula, siyadlala kukita amadoda. We are in the force of gravity. We are not on high heels, le phezulu, and then jumping, and then like ballet and nancy. All the time we are force of gravity. Silapans. Yiko mo ipantsula mele ukhumbula ama values of upantsula ukuthi you need to be humble. You need to be able to survive, and more than even survive, you need to be in unity with other people. You need to be able to pull resources together. We need to complement each other. We need to support each other. So, mina Pantsula logo. Fast forward, then we took Pantsula from the street. Not that we are still not on the street. I can still perform in the street. But we saw this is an art form. Even though we got rejections in other institutions, this is for illiterate people, and then this is for thugs, it's related to all this inferior stuff. But we managed to take Pantsula sasisa kuma theaters, science abstract performances, and travel the world, and being able to share Pantsula kuma correctional services, South Africa, even abroad, and being able to share a culture and then and developed employment for most of young people who were first travelers ever in their families, in their communities. And some of them, their mindset, totally changed. And their leaders in their communities. And even though Pantsula is still young for me now, as a sector, we were one of the few people, because of our elders, they never saw a career as Pantsulan. So hence, after having to travel with Katlehong, I was so pregnant, because I don't believe in security, I believe in freedom. And then I left the crew and still traveling and still all over to my other friends, my colleagues, which was Steveni, Faleni, and then now Noburu Mhlabane, to continue with the legacy. But now, as I was pregnant, and then I saw that we need to do something that is bigger than just building a family home. Because the Kamalami Vusumuzi or Vusumzi, it means wake up, build a home for your family, and further build a village, with your community. Not that Guti mean it's a must Guti because I was given that name of Funugul follower. It totally just makes sense. And for me, it's part of my motivation. So we've traveled. Now Impilo Mapantsula, and then who is documenting Pantsula? Because there were white people coming all over, taking, stories, and then not really presenting them how we want to present them, And with pictures, people are coming and taking pictures, and then, they get to be commissioned for those pictures and whatnot. So we had to understand all these things, because we had to build, I can say, a generational passive, income, and build our own platforms also as well. But the little, that we saw, which for me, and I believe this Pantsula is a multi-billion-dollar untapped industry. When you look at the hip hop, I see distant cousins. It happened they are in America, and probably they were exposed, in other things, maybe earlier, or maybe America is in a totally, different kind of an exposure and a thinking. But when I see Pantsula, I still see a lot of young people having to be employed within a sector ya Mapantsula, whether as filmmakers, whether as writers, whether as administrators, whether as producers, whether as amanesi, as stage, designers, as lighting technicians. Because with Impilo, we are all about documenting Pantsula and developing this creative human expression. Hence why I partnered with other Mapantsula from a east, a west, a south, a center, as in the central Joburg also as well, trying to expand and building my relationships that are meant to build our bridges. So that's why we are here today. We've got the city plug, which are young people, and then because of I'm also running a space, VEP Dance Academy Theatre and Studios, because I believe that we can start at our own backyards, because that's where I started. Hence, another mission also, as well as we've already started buying smaller nyana lands, that one day we build centers of excellence in our communities, have our own mini theaters until to, big theaters in our own communities. However, the small that one can contribute, even if, you build this house, just me having to contribute with just one brick. If 2, 3, 10, it's a bonus. Because I believe with Pantsula, we've got something that is proudly, genuinely South African, but that can be shared and be spread to the world. Because there's a lot of AMA values that communicates ubuthina nje emhlabeni, not just only as Africans or as South Africans. Olilo.